bearing with us, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome. And we're so happy to have you here. This is the first session of our dairy grazing series, Pasture Prep, Virtual Ruminations for your 2021 grazing program. As you probably all know, this series is primarily focused on dairy-related topics in the Northeast, but we do believe that this content is valuable for all grazers across the country. And we encourage audience participation. So if you have any questions for our presenters, please submit those to the Q&A function, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. If you're having any sort of technical issues or need some sort of assistance, please feel free to submit those into the chat function, and Betsy or I will help address those problems for you. We are recording today's session, and we will make the recording as well as a copy of any sort of materials that are presented available to you through a link on Box, and we will get that emailed to you tomorrow or the next day. So today's session is considerations for your 2021 spring greenup, and I am very pleased to introduce our speakers. Troy Bishop, aka the Grass Whisperer, who is with Madison County Soil and Water Conservation District, and then Sam Corrigan, Dr. Sam Corrigan, I should say, is a postdoc with University of Massachusetts Extension, and she's a project coordinator with the Livestock Institute and the New England Grazing Network. So with that, I would like to pass it over to them, and they are gonna present for us today.
Cool.
Great. All right, I'm gonna screen share here.
Oh no, we're not gonna get PowerPointed to death. Oh,
After this, people are gonna beg for a PowerPoint.
oh God. Oh, phew. At least it's a picture slide. So welcome everybody from wherever you're at or whatever level you're at. This is grazing, and our focus or our task was to really think about what happened last year, and in that context, what's happening this year and what kind of things are we thinking about for starting up the grazing season. We're not really going to be talking much past the first day of summer. So we're really trying to figure out and have a discussion on how we're going to start better, more profitably with what we knew of last year's dry weather. And we're sort of going to be stirring the pot, stirring the stew. You're going to hear some recipes. Take it with a grain of salt, because everything is sort of localized. We have our opinions. Sam and I feel have pretty good chemistry. We can banter well. She's a good banterer, if that's a word. So we're gonna be talking past tense, present, and doing stuff in the future. So why Sam is here is because I learned that she's technically an agronomist. She has a biology focus to her credentials. And what I've tried to have Sam do is be the voice of the grass. So she's going to take on what does the grass plant feel from our management? So you're gonna see a cute picture, but Sam is going to be sort of the background of the plant, and I'm just going to be the old man that's got 35 years of experience in the field, and I'm sort of play in the background a little until I'm up to the plate.
Yeah.
So you want to start off there, Samantha?
Yeah, I'm not the grass union rep yet. But as Troy said, yeah, it's nice to talk to Troy. We can get really going and thinking about, okay, what's the grazing style, and then, well, what is the plant thinking about your grazing? I got to warn you, the grass is kind of sassy, but we'll try to get it under control. So I guess, these are the thoughts to kind of get you oriented. We're going into spring, and when we start thinking about, well, what's green up going to look like? But green up's going to look a lot like where you were last year. Were you in a droughty or dry spot? Were you in a wetter spot? And then also, how did you leave your pastures last season? If you left them in good shape, you're going to, be in better shape this spring. If you left them in not good shape, the ghost of pastures past will continue to haunt you. So, some of this other stuff that we're not going to really get into today, but there is going to be a separate file in the box folder that sort of has some of these thoughts about the plant biology and what's going on and stress responses, if you want to get a little bit more into the nitty gritty. But simple things like if you were in a dry spot last year, what was your fertility like? We know potassium is super important for plants to regulate a drought response and regulate their water. Were you short on potassium? It's going to make your fertility worse, or your drought response worse. Or calcium turns out to actually be important as a drought response. And so all that fertility, again, it feeds into how you handle dry seasons. Winter of 2021, we're still kind of in it, right? We're looking at our crystal ball to predict what's going to happen. But right now, I think most people in New York have good snow cover. But Troy was just telling me that there's some predictions that drought might be moving east. And so we want to have a preemptive plan for when that winter snow melt goes away. And then, of course, we're going to be thinking about, all right, are you going to have any feed inventory left here? Are we going to make it to spring and make it to spring green up? And obviously that's going to affect when you start grazing or when you have to start grazing. So this is the big thing. And I saw a lot of this here in Mass last year. If you overgraze in the summer because you get into summer slump and it was dry, and then you overgraze a little bit, and then fall rolled around and we got a whisper of rain and people got excited and then they grazed again, but that's really a 1-2 punch. And so a lot of pastures went through a lot of the year looking like this, and this doesn't look that great. And so we want to try to prevent that from happening again. So again, just a plug, if you want to kind of get into what's the story arc of what plant stressors happened last year, that'll be in the box folder. So here's this. Troy, I don't know if you guys know, is a graphic designer.
Yeah.
So he sent me this picture, and I thought that was pretty good. So here I am, Samantha Grass.
A rebel in the field, uncontrolled.
Invasive, if not controlled. All right, Troy, you want to tell us about what we're looking at here?
Let me click up my notes. So these are 3 scenarios, and the folks that are on the call or other folks, you've already seen these. These aren't like anything out of the ordinary, but basically I see a lot of moonscaping, just grazing to, that's actually a picture I took of a dairy farm, which is pretty crazy that an animal of some production could make anything from that. And then we have the just right, good grass, good balance of animals and plant growth. And then we have not enough animals. So there's too much. I say too much. Is there any really enough too much feed? There's a little less animals and maybe too much land. The forage got a little bit too tall. That too tallness has a lot of context in it. It could be for many reasons, not just, well, for grazing quality. It could be there's some wildlife in there. It could be you're going to make it for hay. Who knows? But these are the basic things that we see, and things that we saw last year.
Yeah, and if so if I'm the grass and I'm in that moonscape, like, you gotta remember, grass does not care about you and what you want. Grass cares about itself. The only time grass cares about you is when you put it in a bad situation. And so in that moonscape, I'm a plant, you know, I need my leaves. I got to do photosynthesis, right? Those are for me. And then if I don't have leaves, well, then I can't support my roots. And if I don't have roots, then I can't go looking for things like water when there is a drought. And so if I'm that moonscape, I'm mad. I'm not in good shape. Just right, that's a compromise between you and your grass, which is kind of where we're trying to get to, a little for me, a little for you. The not enough, that grass is having a great time. You know, grass wants to grow and make babies and live its life and go about its business. So that might not be great for your animals and your forage quality, but that grass is, you know, going about his business. But okay, so this isn't going to make us any friends, but those last pictures kind of correspond to a golf course, and you know, it's kind of, do you want to be a golf course manager, or do you want to be a grazing manager? And so when we get into those moonscapes, it's like the putting greens, where they're being mowed to within an inch of their life every single day, literally, so that you have that playability down there. And golf course managers, I don't even want to say they can get away with this, because that's a pretty hard job, but you know, those putting greens are getting all kinds of fertility. They're getting irrigation, they're getting pesticides, herbicides, they are getting propped up. We're not propping up our pastures. And so it's not sustainable to do it long term. I think that fairway is kind of like that just right. You know, it's getting what it needs, but it's being managed. And then those that least stress is that sort of like a rough, where you're not doing a whole lot of, maybe you're not doing as much management for whatever reason. And so this is our first poll question is, how did you leave your pastures last year? Did they kind of, you know, when you got into winter, did they look like the rough, the fairway, or the putting green?
Ooh, a poll question. Nice.
Yeah, so Alicia
Good.
just brought up the first poll question, and so you should see it. We're going to give a few 30 seconds for you all to put in your responses. And we can see 7 of 14 have voted. We're a little over halfway.
Wow, there's some good grazers, a lot of fairway.
But
Yeah.
also, if you're an ag service provider, you could also, and you're saying, well, I don't have pastures, you could think about, what did you see the most of last year?
I guess I can't take the poll then. Okay, never mind.
All right, so our poll results. 2 people said they manage it like the rough, so that's the least stress. 64% said the fairway, right where we want to be, and 2 said the putting green. So we are happy that you all are here today.
Yeah, boy, my dogs are barking. Sorry, I'm like, who does the UPS man here? So, Troy, what do you think about this?
Well, I'm happy it's 60%. Well, it's a good place to start. In my world, at least for last year, there was the drought and the overgrazing were hand in hand.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're always our going forward, we're always trying to find the balance. What's right, what's fair, what's in the fairway. So this fairway in the where you're going to manage will determine, you know, what your goals determine where your management's going to be. But unfortunately, when you're in this drought from last year, is a lot of us got one way or the other. We weren't ideal.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I hear from a lot of the farms I work with,
Right.
and myself.
Right.
Okay.
So, well, here's the thing. Let's see. So Depending on how you left them, and it sounds like people have a pretty good idea of how they left them, that's gonna affect your rate of spring green up. So this is something that you've probably seen, maybe this graph or something similar in the past. You know, the less residue you have, the slower your regrowth is. So this is true in season, but it's also true with how much residue you left last year. So that's why we tend to take it down to about 4 inches in season. You kind of split the difference between, you get the most forage, but you still get quick regrowth. But if you're down here in this, 2 inches territory, you're gonna be looking at slower spring green up, and it's gonna mean you're gonna have to wait a little longer before you can get out and graze. So you can already predict a little bit what you're gonna be seeing this spring.
So I got a question for you, Sam. So if you're down in that really tight grazing in the fall, what's a practical, how many days more rest or recovery do you need this spring if you've gone a little too far?
Yeah, I think it's what I like to say is go by height. That's a great question, because the rate of growth and the rest period can be so variable. So the thing is going to be, and we're going to talk about this a lot, monitoring your rates of regrowth. And so in the spring, you kick off the snow and you say, oh, look, it's green. But as Troy's going to show you in a minute, well, you might only get 2 inches of growth in 19 days. So you just got to watch how fast is it growing. And you can assume if it was shorter last year and your neighbors was taller going into the fall, you're going to see differences. And so I think that's also important to say, just because your neighbors are grazing doesn't mean you should be grazing. It's relative to what you did last year. Here's poll 2. So we talked a lot, and we're going to keep talking about how it was kind of a dry summer last year. And so this is for New York, this is what your drought looked like. You can see over here in 2020, 2021 and 2021, it wasn't actually that, depending on where you were. This is state averages. It wasn't actually that terrible when you compare it back to this 2016 to 2017 year. And so, so here's our question. I think I put in the wrong year. I think it was 2016, but think about that last bad drought. What have you done differently? Or have you come up with a resiliency plan? Or, and again, if you're an ag service provider, what have you seen farmers do?
So our answer is, I don't remember what happened between now and 2017. Secondly, I came up with a resiliency plan, or I've planned for drought. And thirdly, I know I have a problem or a risk, but I haven't yet taken action or come up with a plan. And it looks like so far we're about halfway in. Responses are pretty darn split between these. Which
isn't all that surprising.
Mm-hmm.
Because a Plain community member has said in the past that, why do I plan for drought when it always rains here in the Northeast? And so I can't really argue, but rain makes grass, and obviously grass makes money. So the dry weather is a concern, probably just as much as wet weather. Overall, having a resiliency plan of any sort would be good to go into 2021, especially last year when we knew this year's definitely different, a definitely different winter. Last year, we basically had an open winter and not much snow, and it was really, I mean, I planned for I planned for a dry year. And so that, even that thought process helped me create some kind of a plan that we'll talk about. So I can see it's all over the board, which looks like room for improvement.
All right. Yeah, well, you're going to hear us say about 1 million times today, got to collect some on-farm data. And Troy, he practices what he preaches. So here you go.
So when I looked, and I'll be the fall guy. Back in the pandemic, this was, a year ago, I was trying to become relevant in my grazing specialist world. So I said, well, because I'm sequestered at home, I'll just go out and start measuring what's happening come spring. And so the history was that I left a good 6 to 7 inches of residual back in the fall before this spring, this 2020 spring. And so I was trying to figure out, well, when is it time to graze? So I put these sticks out, but back up a little. I have this, I'm a good advocate for a grazing plan. And so when I look back at my years of grazing, I try to figure out what's the average recovery time between grazings, between the first one and the second one. And because it's all over the board, you hear about 20 days a lot of times, you hear about 15 days. In actuality, on our place, was 27 days. You can see there's some variability. But everyone's got a grazing chart or a grazing stick that I'm aware of. Pretty much, if you want a grazing stick, you can have a grazing stick or some kind of measuring tool. And so they're in the back of the truck or on the 4x4 or whatever. I'll put them in the field and try this spring to start measuring regrowth. And so what happened was, if you'll remember last year, it was dry and then it was cold. And then we had a little bit of warm up, because I can look at my grazing chart, and that's the beauty. I can look back and say, oh, what happened? And I'm like, oh, crap. It got warm, things started to move, and then it got dry and cold. And so on April 4th, I was sort of excited that I had this regrowth from the fall of 2020, went through the winter, and started measuring when was the right time. And the problem is, what I thought I was going to be grazing pretty early turned into basically 2 inches of growth in 19 days. And so that's a problem. I'm a custom grazer. I have finishing animals that I can call on to start grazing. And I couldn't. I was scared. It was going to be a dry summer, I thought, and I planned to have some good forage ahead of me. And so when I started measuring, I kept watching and nothing happened. And Sam talked about this cold deacclimation. And I'm wondering, what the heck is cold deacclimation? Why is the plant not growing faster?
Yeah, boy, I might have to go yell at some dogs here in a minute. So I mean, we've probably heard about cold acclimation in the fall. Plants start to say it's getting cold and the days are getting shorter and they start to go dormant. But then in the springtime, they have to come out of that dormancy. And it's not like they just say, I'm cold acclimated and now I'm not. It's this incremental change, and they're doing things like, it's like you wake up in the morning and you got to brush your teeth and you got to make some coffee, you got to get ready for the day. And so, the plants are doing the same thing, but they don't fully deacclimate, because if they do, then things happen like what Troy said. Well, then you get snow. So if they fully deacclimated, they can die, right? They need to keep some type of cold tolerance. And I don't know if you remember, there was a few years ago where we had spring warm up and all the apple trees blossomed, and a lot of those blossoms died because they got fully deacclimated, but winter wasn't over yet. And so that caused some problems. But this is something Troy and I are talking about. It's like, It's like when you were a younger person, not you, Troy, the collective you, me. And if you go out to the bar, right, if you think about it like this, if you go out to the bar at 9 p.m., like I'm talking not your neighborhood Irish bar, I mean like the club scene. I was a young person in Cleveland when I was about, 21. But anyways, if you went out at 9 o'clock, it's boring. There's nothing going on. People are getting warmed up for the night. That's kind of like what's going on, in this first picture here on April 4th. Everybody's just getting warmed up for the night. April 23rd, I would say that's about your 10 p.m. And I'm going to come back to 10 p.m. My friends always wanted to go out at 11 because you go out at 11 and it's wild and everyone's drunk and you're like, whoa, now I got to catch up. There's too much going on. That's like spring green up in May. Now you're like, oh, it's 11 o'clock. We want to hit it around 10 p.m., right? It's not too early, so you seem lame, but it's not too late, and so everything's crazy. Totally, believe it or not, same thing with spring green up. It's like hitting it at that sweet spot. But you got to have a little local knowledge to know what's 10 p.m., right? And so I think that's why having this on-farm data, data doesn't have to be a scary word. Having this on-farm knowledge is really important so that you can hit it at the right time.
And so the right time, this right time is haunts all of us grazers because we have bunchy, we have the cool season takes off and then all the understory of whatever clovers and stuff is very low. And so we're always like, well, should we put them out? Should we not put them out? I'm almost out of hay. And so at this juncture, after the cold and then we had snow on this grass, you can still see the snow in the background, is I was still worried that if I grazed that and called for the animals, that if I took it down and then moved off, I wasn't sure what was going to happen. It was trending dry and cold, and I didn't want to get them there, graze it all off, and then come back and there wasn't much there and overgraze. But if you go to the next slide or two.
Oh.
Okay. All right.
Well, we were just, let's skip this point. Well, the point we were going to make was if you want to slow down spring green up, then graze real low. That's in jest, but that's something that we kind of see is you want to get out and then you graze, but it's not really growing and it gets too low. And then you slow it down too much. But this is Troy's May 5th picture.
And so, between the April 23rd and May 5th, things started to move. But if you remember, even on Mother's Day, we had snow and it was 23 degrees. So I waited and now I feel like this right here, I don't think I can let it go any longer because I have the whole other farm, the other 20 paddocks to get to. And so I was much more confident in this than I was the 23rd. And so Samantha Grass, how are you feeling? Like, is this the right time to graze or was April 23rd? Is this 11 o'clock or
this was 11 o'clock?
Is this 11 o'clock? It's too late.
I wouldn't say it's too late. I would just say grass is off to the races,
Okay.
I would say you could split the difference between April 23rd and May 5th. What I like to recommend and what I think some people like to do is go by height. And this is tough, I know, with because you kind of have the understory here. I think you could have gone out around 10 inches. I think you could have gotten a little earlier. The understory is tough because, here this understory is clovers and there's some dandelions and some things that just don't get all that tall in the first place. And so I think this gets after a little bit more of the grazing management where you got to try to force them to eat down evenly. And that's a factor of your stocking rate, time, size. But I know, Troy, you like to do a bite and move, right?
Yep. So if you're milking cows, and you put them out on the 23rd or the 5th, how are they reacting? Obviously there's plenty of protein. What do you think that's going to affect?
I think because on the 23rd, how much height did we have, right? We go back and we look at that.
You had 7, 8 inches maybe.
Right.
In the one clump, and the rest of it, you didn't have much at all.
Right. I think that's going to become trickier just from, dairy cows are so sensitive to number of bites per hour and also the size of the bite. So you're either not going to get a lot of big bites out here, or you're going to have to take more bites per hour to make up for it, or you got to walk around more to find it. And so then it's not that energy efficient. And so that's why I would say for both the grass's sake and the dairy cow's sake, wait until you get a little closer to maybe May 1st. And again, it depends on the year, right?
So basically 10:30.
Yeah, 10:30, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the cows are still young, but
so this is the action that I have finished beef cows. I'm finishing animals, so they are the same as a dairy cow, except they don't have to milk them. But so in this high quality, move them off, this is all that they ate. And so what I witnessed is what they ate and in a day's time. And so is that enough? Should I have taken it down more? What is the grass? The grass is happy. Animals are obviously happy.
Yeah, I mean, the grass got an easy morning of it, right? It's like the bus showed up on time and their coffee was hot and they got a bagel. This is an easy day. Boss isn't in, so you can show up late. But I would say, again, this is kind of a management thing. I think because you have a unique style where you bite and you move quick. Whereas if you have them on a little longer, you might get some more uniformity, or again, if it's a little bit smaller, you might force them to chew up the orchard grass a little bit more. But also I think don't get too nervous when you see that your clover is a little lower, because clover just is a little lower. I also think that if you, to me on this other spot, it looks like that grass has been trampled. And so if I pulled that up, I would be interested to know, well, how tall actually is that, or how much residual did they actually bite down? Because they're probably not going to come back to this spot and try to pull that other grass up when they have standing grass. So yeah, I get it. It's tricky. Go ahead, Trey.
No, I was just going to the next one.
Next slide.
Okay, so before you move on, because there's a good question in the Q&A, will leaving more grass in the fall leave more thermal mass on the ground and help speed up cold deacclimation?
What a great question. Who is this scientist?
This gentleman just signed up this morning, so I'm so glad he's here.
I explicitly said to Betsy, no hard questions.
I will give him the kudos for asking such a great question.
A great question. I think the bigger thing, so the big thing is snow cover. And so our biggest insulator is snow. And that keeps it at 32 degrees, which plants actually do really well at 32. I mean, they have freezing tolerance down to some of them below 0. So I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, I think what you might more get into is you might end up with some worm food. I think Troy might agree. You might get a little bit more decomposition from that versus actually getting insulation. Yeah, that would be and then you get this cooler canopy too, because then you don't have sun penetrating when you do get snow melt to heat things up. It's kind of all covered and cool, and the soil is cool. So I don't think so. Troy, do you have any thoughts?
So I did an experiment, which I did take pictures, but they're not on here, where I did exactly that. I left more. I took a spot where it was very tall. And then I took right next to it, I took where the cows graze right down in the fall. And then I left the stakes in and came back in May and looked at it. And by the time I went to graze it, it's weird. I know, it's crazy, but both of them look the same. Like whether you left it and it came down or it was short and came up, they basically, you couldn't hardly tell there was a difference, which got me thinking, maybe bad or good, that should I be leaving that much residual if I don't see any, my gut says no, I should. And then as a stockpiler, I shouldn't feel guilty if I take more in the fall if I've rested it properly, because in the spring it all seems to, it's sort of that root strength. So I don't actually know the answer, or if Samantha Grass is happy either way, except that when given the heat units, they both performed about the same, and that may be just my farm. I don't know. It was an interesting. I would have thought, oh yeah, if you leave more residual, you're going to have it, but that the sun and the heat getting down to that crown really set it off really quickly, and it caught up. So I don't know. As usual, I'm confused.
I
All
think
right.
there's got to be a sweet spot, right? Like
Yep.
maybe 6 inches is nice because you get good photosynthesis, you've got good residual, but like Troy said, at a certain point you're stockpiling, and then you want to graze that.
So
Troy,
let's click on to the next one. Yeah. So we're gonna take a poll on this one, but I'm not even remotely in my grazing plan gonna graze this. And when I did this presentation, or I attempted to do the presentation, it's really almost ready to graze again. And so that's where we're going with this poll question, I think.
Yeah. So just to contextualize this, so, Troy grazed on the 5th, it's May 16th, it's 10 days later. So if this is you, what would you have done?
All right, so our options are, I would have grazed only if I needed the forage. I would graze it. This is fine, looks great. Or thirdly, I would not graze this. I would give it a longer rest period. So when we were preparing this talk, we should have recorded all of those because there was some great conversation in those, but hopefully we'll, no pressure guys. I hope you guys had the same good conversation. But we've got some votes coming in. We're 10 of 14 responded so far. And if you're an extension person, respond how you might tell your clients, how you might, tell them what to do if they ask you this. I'm curious. So we've got 10 of 15 in. Pretty, well, we have a winner. Looks like we can probably close it, Alicia.
So it's mixed. In my neck of the woods, if I didn't know the story, the backstory, I would probably say go ahead and graze it. My question to Sam was, well, you're the grass plant. After 10 days, I treated it fairly well, the first grazing. What say you, Miss Grass Plant, if I graze you in 10 days versus 20 days? What should I consider? Because now I don't want to feed any more feed. My hay barn is empty.
Mm-hmm.
I want to graze, darn it.
What would you do if this was your lawn, right? You'd say, look at my lawn. It's spring. It's growing like crazy. I got to mow that. So I think we tend to say, when we think about it as grazing, we want to be safe. And I agree with that, right? So this is Sam, the scientist, first. We kind of say, don't go below 14 days as a rest period. That's kind of a loose rule of thumb. But hey, I'm the grass out here. Maybe you give me a bunch of fertility, right? I had a big breakfast and it rained and I'm full of coffee and like I feel great and I'm growing and I'm doing things. I'm having a great time out here. If you come back and you graze me again, you know, as grass, I'm like, well, now I got to start growing again, right? Because grass, I'm just trying to flower and make babies. I mean, that's what grass is out there doing. It's trying to live its life and reproduce and sow its wild oats. And so at this time of the year, it's saying this is a really great time to make babies. And so when you mow it or when you graze it, it says, I got to start all that work all over again. You just cut my head off, but I have all these resources. So yeah, I'm going to start growing again, and I'm going to try to keep growing vigorously because I'm trying to get to my destination of reproduction. So I get these people a lot that said I would have grazed it only if I needed the forage. I think that's a good split in the difference. You know, if you don't have to, I would wait a little bit longer. But if you need it, I don't think you're going to end up in big trouble, because obviously your grass is happy; it's growing fast.
So is this the point where you can use these measuring tools? You know, a good practical way to look at it. What about the 3 to 5 leaf growing stage? So there's always been talk to start grazing at the 3 leaf stage. And then the other part is if you don't want it to go to seed, because then you're going to lose production later on in the summer. So this seems like a pretty fair. So what do you look for the 3 leaves at least to tell you that it's okay to graze it after 10 days, or what is the mechanism there?
You know, I gotta be honest, that's not something I do a lot with. I mean, usually the recommendation is height. Pick a height that you're gonna graze at. Once it regrows to that height, graze it again. And so, you know, around here, a lot of people try to, in a good season, wait to 10 inches tall. And then you go, because, you know, the thing that's going to happen is if it goes from this point of, it starts to get too tall. Tall isn't really the problem. Tall is an indication of developmental age. And so eventually tall turns from leaf into stem into flower. And so, you know, I would say let height be your guide. And also, if you're collecting regrowth rates, I mean, Troy, I've heard you say you see things like an inch a day or something crazy of growth. And so when you're collecting that, you're looking out there and saying, well, okay, if this keeps going an inch a day, in 2 more days, I'm going to be at 12 inches tall. I'm going to be making flowers real soon. And now it's 1 a.m. at the bar and you have no control and you have to call an Uber, you know?
Yeah. All right, we got to keep moving.
Yeah, we got to keep moving. Ooh, we got to move faster. We got to go.
Yeah, we got to go. Yeah, you can't.
How are we?
No.
When can we go to, Betsy, Alicia? When do we have to?
We're
Just
doing
keep
okay.
moving.
Yeah,
Keep moving that
I'm
slide.
trying.
You guys are doing great.
All right. Yeah, we talked about it, right? Or you want to go back?
No. No.
35.
So again, the backstory is I still haven't been around the farm yet with these animals, and so I'm still coming up. And now it's, what is it at the bar? It's I don't know. The cab and the band have already left.
Yeah, we're getting to 3 a.m. here.
So the again, in some circles, the regenerative group has talked about you know, the boot stage and letting everything get mature, that, you know, that it wants to, not mature, what was it going to say, let all the plants in the sward recover. So it's hard to do that when there's a diversity. So here you've got, you know, orchard grass that's already is starting to head, but all the other understory plants are still having a good time. The quality's still good. So is this too late to graze? So I don't know. As a dairy farmer or a grass finisher, you are pushing the limit in terms of, I guess, quality. you definitely got quantity. What do you say there, Samantha Grass?
Well, just so that everybody, remembers where we went from 1 a.m. here, Troy did not graze this, right? And so he let it go a little while longer. What I see here is I see flower heads. Not to be crass, but people are starting to leave the bar with other people here. You know? So I know, no, you're never going to invite me to speak again.
Nope.
So I would have split the difference. This is when you got to intervene a little earlier in the night before phone numbers start getting exchanged. And I would say that's like, you could have split the difference between that 5/16/10 day and between 5/31. Because the grass doesn't care. The grass is doing exactly what it would like to be doing. It is fulfilling its role of reproduction. I mean, that's it, right? But it's not going to be so great for your forage quality.
But what I will say is, as a farmer, if you're monitoring these growth rates, or our takeaway is monitor your growth rates, measure. You can make decisions earlier, like if you want to make baleage, or you have another set of livestock to put in there, or whatever. You have the measuring and the watching. You have the tools to make decisions. There's reasons why I didn't do what I have a reason, and it's my recipe, not yours. But you can see the transformation over the last, even a month, how quickly things go from, oh, I should have grazed it the 23rd of April, and then it just blew up. And so this is where we're at. Should we be out earlier? Should we wait till 10 o'clock, 10:30, 11, and trying to find that sweet spot and balance is somewhat difficult. And there's a lot of backstories to the fertility issues and what we did last year and how it was. That's why people have barns and they have feeders. They just let the cows go in there and they don't have to worry about this dynamic. But I can, we probably should move to the next one.
Yep. We're rounding it up to the end here.
Okay, so this is, I'm fully prepared to take the brunt of, oh, well, I don't think that's right either. But this is actually what happened, because this bottom field is quite fertile and the top fields aren't. And so you move quick here and then you slow it down at the top. And so your rotation, and I didn't have enough cows and blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden we're in prairie. And so, and as a dairy farmer or somebody finishing beef, you probably look at this optic and go, oh my God, what are you doing? So in some respects, it's somewhat too late. Not for me though, because these finishers are not forced to eat what they don't want. And so this is when you use fence and management skill to move several times a day to get more trample on the ground, to utilize this forage differently. Because these animals are going, what you don't see is 2 foot of clover, right? The orchard grass is beyond, it's making seed for the next generation. But below that is all this great stuff that's fattening cattle or making milk. Also, if you're in a conservation program, right, and you have birds you wanna see grow, or on our farm we have a hunting lease. This is where the next generation of bucks might be harbored. And so again, these are just tools. Is it right? Well, it depends on your attitude or your context of your farm. I don't know, but what I do know is there's no rain. So you were bantering me about, well, it's pretty too old and whatever. I'm like, yeah, but we had snow not a month ago, And then now we have no rain. And so I'm in the opinion that at least there's feed there and it's covering the ground. And so it might be a tad old, but when I put all that litter down and they graze this 2 foot of clover, animal performance is still high. And we're going to create some organic matter for the soil, I guess, or armor the soil. But then I realized, or you told me, that trampling doesn't necessarily mean organic matter. It's the clipping of the grass and the sloughing off the roots that builds the soil health. Is that right? Or am I wrong? I want to be right. I don't want to be wrong.
You're right. No, I mean, because the thing is, when you put all that grass down, right, we're back to a golf course. You're building up a thatch layer. And it can be hard, you got to think about how is that carbon going to work its way into your soil. What happens is a lot of that surface carbon goes back out into the atmosphere. But when you graze, right, there's like a balance between your roots and your shoots. And so less shoot means some of that root dies off to stay in this balance because it doesn't have enough above ground grass to support it, right? And so that's where a lot of your carbon sequestration is happening in that process. But also, I mean, this grass at this point, it's got two things going on. One, it just put all this energy into making flowers and making babies, right? And then you cut its head off. It's like, okay, well, I just put a lot of energy into doing that. And now it's a drought. And now I don't have resources. And like, screw you, buddy. But I think also, the thing is with drought, I totally hear what you're saying about wanting to cover the soil and prevent water loss, and you still have some feed. I think the thing is when you graze, right, so you do hit this, the plants aren't actually all that mad to have less surface area. Like if you see in a really bad drought year, the corn leaves really curl up, they're trying to make themselves small so they don't have all of these pores to lose water through. And so when you graze this, you actually reduce some of that surface area, less space to lose water. But then you kind of get this balance because even though they slow down and they're not growing, they're still living, they still have to do like, okay, well, we stopped growing at 18, but we still need to eat, and so it's the same thing. And so when you graze them real low and you're like, well, they're dormant, whatever, they're like, no, that was all my, Troy, I like how you call them the solar panels. You just took away all my ability to make energy to keep my roots alive so I can keep looking for water and try to live through this. And so, that's where I would say you got to be a little bit more conservative or thoughtful about, well, what is the plant trying to do when you get into these droughts?
So with all these seed heads, is this loss of production for the season?
Troy, this is a great question. And I tried to look into it and I couldn't find in the literature any clear answers on this. But Troy, I like the idea you brought up of, and I think it makes sense. Well, these plants just put all this energy into making seed heads. So one, they've lost energy. Two, they've kind of lost their initiative to regrow. They've made their seed. They've completed what they're trying to do. Now they just want to survive the summer and make sure they can have a crown that's good and get to the next year to do it all over again. So I think your instinct is right that this could slow down your productivity. Or you have to wait for the plant to kind of reacclimate because like I said, it just made all these babies and you cut its head off and it's like, I was in baby making stage. Now I'm back to being this tall. It has to figure out what the hell is going on now. But I think the thing where you really hit your productivity is if you're a dairy farmer, you're probably not going to get the energy you need off of this. And that's going to be the consequence of the cow. Again, the grass is like, that's fine. I'm going about my business. But your cow might have some different feelings about that.
So I wanted to show you the next slide. There's only two left, this one and the other final one. So given that that we had drought, we had an official drought here in central New York. So we weren't even as dry as out in the Finger Lakes in some places, but with all of this field and what has happened in the trampling and whatever, it took 55 days from that point to August 13th before it was ready to graze again. And it is beautiful. Mm-hmm. And it will grow, it'll grow beef and milk production. but it shows you that it took 55 days to do that in this environment of drought. And so if you don't have a plan to get that kind of rest period and you graze it sooner, you could be in trouble even the next grazing, or you could be setting back so it's just sort of this progression of here's what actually happened in this dry weather. And for us, the context is we have to have feed to feed animals that we get paid for. And so we're a little light on the animal numbers. That is our resiliency plan in this dry weather phase. We can always add more animals, but we want more forage to be able to manage than having a ton of animals. And so that's our balance, and it's not the same for every farm, but it does show you kind of what last year brought on. And again, we talked about if the land was fully fertilized and fertile and you got your water and everything else, there's no way you'd need 55 days. You could probably be 30 days. So again, we don't have that, and we don't have rain. And so you can see what actually transpired. So I think that will bring us to the final.
I'll just add one quick note to that. The big thing is that when you're in drought, if you overgraze it, then you're just going to perpetuate your problem when you do get a little bit of rain. But if you're in drought and you don't overgraze it, then when you get that grain, or when you get that rain, the plant will make up for some lost time because it had the energy to respond. Whereas if it's overgrazed, it doesn't even have the energy to respond to the rain. So you kind of set yourself up for failure when things do get better. Okay, so here's our last slide. Here's our take-home messages. So I think one thing is that we talk about a lot, there's all this biology going on. And something that Troy and I talk about a lot is, understanding what this biology is so that you can work with it other than trying to fight against it. Because I don't want to pick a fight with grass, I don't think I'm going to win. I wouldn't want to pick a fight with Samantha grass, but so Troy, I think this is something that you're really good at, is getting to know your plants and this on-farm data.
Yeah, getting the practical. I wrote down that ballpark data is good enough. We don't need to be scientists. Just continue to use your eye and your observation. And if you have to write it down, but you can make an educated guess. If it's an inch a day and there's 20 days, that's 20 days, 20 inches. If it's only a quarter of an inch, you can make predictions of that. But if you don't know what your growth rate is, it will take 3 days. You graze it, and then 2 more days to see what the growth rate is. And excellent managers that make money grazing, that's what they do.
Yeah, and I know it doesn't work for everybody, but if you have the equipment and you can't say ahead of spring green up, if you have your grazing chart, if you know how much land you have and you need for the spring, you can set aside some land for hay if that makes sense for you. You can, do some clipping so that it doesn't get away from you, so that once you do get up to it, it's not too far along. And hey, if you clip it, well, you're going through that root sloughing off process and you're adding organic matter and you're still doing good stuff. And I think this is a big one. Troy talks about, Troy, would it be fair to say that you stock based on summer availability? I mean, you don't stock based on your spring abundance.
No. Our context is grazing days. So we want more grazing days than we want more animals. So more grazing days makes us more money than putting a bunch of animals on there and then shipping them away if things. So again, our resiliency is having a few less animals and a few more that acres to animals ratio. So, and again, it's just our context. Our financial, environmental, and family goals basically drive that. So again, every farm is different, but it's a good time. 2021. I mean, literally in a month's time, you got to start making some plans, and what you learned from last year, you should learn. and try to see how it's going to affect this year. All right, let's get some questions.
Yeah, you guys did awesome.
Sorry.
Staying at, no, you guys did great. And I think, because of that, you have a ton of questions to answer. So this is great. So we're just going to start going through the Q&A box. And so some of them, sorry, might be a little bit harder than others, Sam, but I have full confidence. You guys will be great. So we're going to start very technical. What is the role of organic matter?
Oof.
Same gentleman as before. So yeah, he's got a worse one later. Don't worry.
We're gonna block him from future webinars. No. I mean, so one of the big things that your organic matter does is it can help you with your water holding capacity. And so when you do get rain, it can help you hold on to it. It can help with water infiltration. It really plays into your soil structure itself. And so that's also how your roots, can move through the soil. Your organic matter is also, it's a pool of food for your microbial activity. And so you want all this microbial diversity, right? That's a part of soil health and living soil. Well, that soil organic matter gives them something to eat so that they stay around. And then also it's a pool of nutrients. So as soil organic matter breaks down, that's giving you nitrogen back into your soil. Troy, do you want to add anything?
Nope. Well, all right. So the organic matter for our farm is organic. So the organic matter provides fertility, right? It's worm food and so forth and so on. It gives us that organic nitrogen and some things. So all the reasons that you just said, and again, when we have a lot of rain, we want to capture it and hold it. When it's dry, we want to have whatever rain we have captured. And so it's all about retained moisture, because that's what grass needs, moisture to grow.
Yeah, I think organic matter is a part of your resiliency plan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Next, I'm going to group a couple of these questions together. So this next question says, wouldn't that spring growth on the shorter residual? I think this went back to the question of the one that was left with more residual over the winter versus the one that was mowed down. Wouldn't that be thanks to a long recovery period the previous summer? I was thinking that when we were going through this, it might have been the health of the plant, but I think you guys kind of talked about that as we went through. So that brings to the next question. How do you determine when a grass has recovered?
I mean, the book answer is it's by height, right? It's did it regrow? So when you, because you got to think, right? Like, how would you feel if you're in the middle of doing a project and you get interrupted and then you have to go back to it? So the grass is in the middle of growing, you interrupt it, you cut its head off. It's got to kind of sort itself back out, get all balanced, get the roots balanced, and then resume its project of growing. And so that's why we use height as an indicator of recovery, because and that's why you need a longer recovery period in the summer. It takes longer for it to resume. So that's why we kind of say pick a height, graze at that height.
So I'm not in full agreement with that, because in a diverse sward like ours, if we all thought about orchard grass, which we're heavy on orchard grass, that's the problem. We're trying to balance the sward. We know that the orchard grass is going to take off, but we also have clovers and plantain and dandelions and chicory and all these other things that are growing, ryegrasses and things. And so trying to find the sweet spot for all the plants. If we let it all go to recovery, we would basically have what we had after 40 days. We'd have prairie, and that's fine. That is as gold standard. But we're trying to harvest in our sward. It's not a monoculture, so we can't just go by height. So you're basically saying, or you're striving for, I want to have really good grass, but then you've got the understory. And so it's it's a lot more difficult in a diverse sward than it is just a monoculture of orchard grass or Timothy or whatever. And so what is the right answer? It depends. And you'll never get it. You'll never get it right. I've never had it right. And I appreciate this diversity level. So sometimes I don't even worry about the orchard grass heads because I know that they're there. I know that then I start to look at the understory, and the understory has all the good stuff in it. And so I may sacrifice the orchard grass for that understory, because the understory's got all them clovers and real diverse, beautiful, tasty food. So
No, I would agree with you. You got to split the difference, right? And so maybe you better
10:30. It's 10:30 again.
Right. Maybe
We're
it's
back
an
to
average of
10:30.
10. Maybe it's an average of 10 inches. You stick your yardstick in a couple
No,
of places.
10:30. The
Summertime.
bar time. We're on bar time now. Yeah.
Yeah.
10:09. It's not 11. We're still at the 10:30.
Yeah, well, an orchard grass is like the friend you got to keep an eye on because they go too hard, too fast, you know? So I would agree. You got to split the difference.
That's great. All right, here's another one. So does cutting the heads off in the club increase branching and stand thickness?
Oh, such a good question. Troy, do you want to start?
No.
No.
Is that true?
Well,
Tillering? That's what you're basically getting at.
yeah, I mean, there is a relationship between grazing and increasing tillering. So the simple answer is yes, when you graze or when you clip, you can induce further tillering. But in actually trying to translate that from, the really painful research of counting tillers to which sucks, what you see in your pasture, I would say the general rule of thumb is yes, there is an association. Grazing or clipping can promote additional tillering.
It's nice to know we don't know all the answers. We don't. It's very complex.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. This is, so I think this person asked two questions. So what are your thoughts on grazing tall and dairy productivity? We talked a little bit about this. We've heard about the benefits of grazing tall and beef, but I don't know how much metabolizable energy and therefore milk production is lost in tall grazing, for example, mature seed heads. And so why is grazing flower heads a problem? We talked a little bit about it. Do you guys want to expand upon anything with those two questions?
So the tall grazing, yeah, that's another, it depends. Tall's sort of a relative term. I might be tall to Sam, but I'm not tall to a basketball player. I did get a Jim Garish talk last week about tall. His I'm only using orchard grass, but he liked 12 to 14 inches on orchard grass. And so, but I know orchard grass will grow up to 3 feet. And so tall, again, when folks come to look at my pictures and see, I'm not forcing them to graze those tall plants. I'm letting them choose what they want to graze, and then I do something with the stuff afterward. If I want to get more trample, I can change up whether the paddocks are more square or more rectangle. I can get a little more trample that way, or I'm just not going to put the dairy cows in there. I'll have another class of animal that can handle that. It's a very polarizing question. Well, I'm a tall grazer, I'm a mob grazer, I'm a prescribed grazer, I'm a lingered grazer. There's all these interchangeable terms that I'm not quite sure all the contexts is. And so it's a more difficult question to just say, yes, at this point you should do this. It should be, what is your context and what are you trying to achieve? The other part about tall grazing is there's real reasons to do that. you may have a tough drought and you want to reseed your pasture. And so you let a field or two go to seed for soil health reasons, for seeding reasons, for wildlife habitat reasons, for, I don't know, because you want to leave it. I'm not sure.
I would say again, we talk about tall, but again, tall is a proxy for age. You can graze tall sorghum, right? Because it just is tall because it's tall. But when we're talking about, I think for dairy, it's a lot more sensitive because when things get taller, what they also do is they get older. And in order to enable them to be tall and upright, they have to make more fiber. And that's why they can stand up straight and be tall and not fall over. And so as you make more, and there's different types of fiber, I won't get too far into like forage analytics because I'm not an animal scientist, but as you end up with more fiber, you get less intake because they fill up faster. And then you get less digestibility because there's more of that fiber, or slower digestibility. And then your protein also goes down. So there's that sweet spot, where it's a trade-off between more yield because they're taller and older, and the forage quality. And when you're trying to make milk, that net energy is so important. And so especially I think if you're in dairy and you're new to grazing or you're trying to get more into grazing, I totally spend the money to get a soil or to get a forage test, send it to Dairy One, get a forage test for when you think is a good time to graze. And then talk to, one of your extension agents, and they'll help you orient what you think looks good with what that's going to do for your energy, because you can take those tests and you can predict, okay, you have this much energy, this is what your feed looks like, that's going to produce X amount of milk per day. I mean, we actually have that science pretty good. So
I did take a sample of a mobbed, let's call it a mob grazing scene. It's basically 4.5 foot tall prairie. Mm-hmm. And so I only sent into the lab what the cows were eating. Mm-hmm. And what came back was 22% protein and relative feed value of 171, which I think the energy was close to 70. But again, I am letting them eat what they want and moving off. And so that's a different strategy than forcing them in a small space to eat more than what they forcing them to landscape. And so again, it's a fine line. When you let an animal, and I did this, I watched these animals, and so in a couple hours, you can see the steers eating seed heads, just random, not all seed heads, but a few seed heads. And they would go down in the canopy and eat a big wad of 2-foot clover, and then they'd eat a little bit of the plantain, and they'd eat a few weeds and whatever they felt they wanted. And what was left was what trampled. It was rank. And in that context, there is a lot of stuff going on. Soil health, there's wildlife habitat, and beef production and seeding. There's lots going on, but it wasn't a forced activity. And that's where folks get in trouble when they force the animals to take more than they need, force the animals to eat what you want them to eat. And that's a different conversation than to give them the palate and let them decide and then move them off to some more quality feed.
Yeah. And next week, Alicia and I are going to be talking more about the nutrition aspect of grazing and how it changes throughout the season. And so we're going to model a few diets for early grazing versus lush grazing versus the moonscape, try and find something to graze situation. So next week, for sure, we're going to talk through some of those situations. We kind of answered the next one. Is there a place for allowing stands to go to seed? You just talked about that. So we'll finish that one off. So there's a couple that are on clipping. So in that June 16th picture, would you clip after grazing it? Or is it too late since the seed heads are out? And then along with that, would you advise clipping after animals run through mature forage as a good general practice? So we'll group those two together.
So if you look to the right, you'll see a line. It looks like a clipped line. And that's where I had to clip to get the fence down through. So what was interesting, and I have a trampling trial, a whole thing I'm writing about now, is when I clipped that and it laid for the day, those animals ate every bit of that clip, every bit of it. There was nothing left. And I'm like, huh, why? You know, you have all this nice feed, and I'm like, okay. So basically what we did is on this field, I forced them to landscape because I was doing a trample trial. So we did full on trample, no clipping. Then I did this kind of activity here and then clip behind them. And then I did a clipping ahead of them. And so it's very interesting because each clipping, not just for lands, not just because it looks nice and everything else, but there's clipping for reasons. And then I did height clipping, like if you clip real high or clip real low, you know, how much residual and so forth and so on. And so, but generally we are clipping because we want to get back to some vegetative growth. And this is the key point for me that I'm going to try hard to work on this summer is to not let it go to seed. And I don't know if I'm going to be successful because I've never been successful yet. I've tried to keep it vegetative in the boot and so forth and so on. And so I don't know what strategy I'm going to use this year. My strategy now is to get out earlier, maybe another week earlier, and try that. But the clipping, again, is a management tool. If you clip for the right reasons or you prune for the right reasons, again, there's no reason why you couldn't make hay. You could pre-clip. Again, lots of reasons why you would clip. There's a ton of reasons why you wouldn't clip. You know, it costs money. You don't have one. I don't know exactly. Again, when a plant is clipped, Sam.
Yeah,
like
how does Samantha grass feel?
Does a clipped pasture grow faster than a trampled plant? Does a clipped plant grow faster than a trampled plant?
I can give you my best guess.
Oh, I thought you were the expert.
Educated guess, Troy.
No, I'm gonna give you my hypothesis. It's
Okay.
Right? It's a fancy guess. So when you trample, right, the grass still has its leaves on it, and now they're smashed down, and it was like, wait a second, I was just standing up and now I'm like all beat up and bruised and my cells are like, you just kicked me in the face and left me bleeding on the sidewalk. And right. Well, because then what it's got to do is what a lot of plants do is they say, well, I've got all kinds of good sugars already made in my leaves. I've already got good nitrogen out in my leaves. I've already done all that work. Let me pick up the pieces of my life, you know, and try to redirect them into my new growth. So I think it's a little bit of a slower turnover because then the plant has to say, okay, you're too damaged. You have to die. Here's the memo that this leaf is going to die. You know, and they're doing this, right? Like it sounds goofy, but it's all this biological, you know, molecules are going, hormones are being made. They got to make all that stuff to mount a response, right? You got to call in the EMTs and they got to get there. And then it's taking inventory. It's like, okay, this leaf still looks good. So let me get my nitrogen from over in this dying leaf and put it in that living one. They got to kind of sort of get themselves sorted back out. And so I think my guess would be that the recovery or like the time to regrowth might be slower. But what I don't know and what I would be curious to find out is, do you get a stronger plant, like a stronger phase 2 when you trample versus you clip? Because when you clip, you just take all that away, right? You just cut my head off. And so all of that work that I did in putting it into my, you know, making sugars and picking up nitrogen, I didn't get the chance to reuse any of that. It's just a clean cut. and I kind of recognize that that's gone, and I just got to get right back to growing again. So I think you might see faster regrowth with clip versus trample, or graze, right? But I think what the plant ends up doing on the other side of that could be a little bit different.
So the question that just popped in, but will a mature plant regrow after being clipped? Or how does it regrow?
Regrow after being clipped. I mean, if we're calling mature, well, a lot of this is going to be the time of the year, you know, and what we get after with regrowth. And so if you're looking at this in June and you clip this, you know, it's starting to respond to the heat anyways. And so it's starting to slow down anyways. So I don't think it's so much about the clip versus the trample. I think it's the time of year. You know, I think if it's spring and you have seed heads and you clip, it'll start regrowing. But also in the spring, when we're talking about clipping, we're not saying like, let it make seed heads and then clip it. It's like, you know, still clip it before it gets really far off, just so that you can keep up with it, so that it doesn't get too far away from you. Again, I don't think I would say that clipping is like necessarily a good thing to plan to incorporate, because in a perfect world, you have this rotation and you hit all of your grass and you never have to clip anything. So I think clipping is a response when plan A didn't work out.
Yay!
All right, I think let's take one more question. And so we're gonna flip it around. We're gonna go back to early spring again. And so this producer wants to know, is no-till seeding or frost seeding, which one is the better practice in the spring? We haven't touched upon this at all yet. And so this is why I wanted to bring this question up. So.
All right, so I have a descending opinion on frost seeding from experience. Frost seeding is highly variable, blah, blah, blah. You have snow and so forth and so on. And so Daryl Emick came to the farm one time, and we walked around and we seeded. Our best catch was there's a sweet spot, probably 10:30, maybe 10 o'clock now, that we put seed out when it was dry enough where the hoof prints had indentated a little bit. So we spread the seed, and then there was a little bit of crust, and when you get a rain, those little pockets, like rain brushes them back in, and we got more catch from a spun on seed in really early April than we did trying to blow a bunch of seed out in the winter time or whatever. And honestly, I don't have hardly anything to do with no-till planting, other than the seed to soil contact is pretty important, and timing. The other part about the seeding practices, if you don't let the paddocks rest so that little seedling can get moving, I don't know. You have to manage differently if you're going to blow out a bunch of seed to interseed or whatever. You probably got something to say about that, Sam.
Sounds like you're picking a fight. No. Yeah, I always like to just contextualize that when we're talking about frost seeding, we're talking about legumes. So when people want to frost seed, I think a lot of it for me is about like how big of an area are you going to try this in? You know, like Troy said, it's really variable. And the seed can be pretty cheap if it's in a small area. And so I would encourage people to try it in a smaller area first and see if you like it. Or if you're getting enough of a germination for it to be worth it to you. I would also say that we tend to hear, you know, more anecdotally that I think you might not see a whole heck of a lot in that first year. It's just small, it's slow growing, it's in that understory. I think you tend to see more of it in year 2. And so it could be a little bit of a delay. In terms of no-till seeding, there's actually, maybe Betsy, I can share it with you and you could share it, or this person can email me. We did a webinar last summer with Rick Kersbergen, and he did a whole webinar on no-till pasture renovation. And I think that would be great to reference, because he's going to do a better job than me. But I also think one of the things to think about, like when we're thinking about plant biology, in the spring, your grass is super competitive. And so if you introduce new seeds in the spring, then you're introducing them to really competitive, already established plants. And so it might be better to err on the side of fall, where they can still good establishment, and then they can be a good competitor in the following spring, but they don't have quite as much competition from the already established grasses in the fall. But I can share that resource, and if you're into no-till pasture innovation, I think that would be a great thing.
So I had I've had the other strategy where we have the clover here growing, and so the cheapest and easiest way to increase your legume content is to stockpile. And so the red clover goes to seed after in the fall if you have a stockpiling period. And we haven't planted legumes in years because of that stockpiling regimen where you're basically allowing it to go to seed, and there is a lot of seed and stockpiled red clover or white clover, and then again it's a lot cheaper. It just happens. I don't even anyway, but it is a planned activity,
Right.
And it definitely works.
Awesome. All right, guys. We are to the point where we need to wrap up. So I would like each of you to give us like your 30-second commercial for what your takeaways are, or something you would like your call to action to be for the people listening today. And then after that, Alicia has some wrap up stuff, and we'll let you, your 30-second takeaway, whoever wants to go first.
So I have a grazing plan. I'm very high on it. So you can get a hold of me. I can get you the templates and so forth and so on, because measuring and planning and implementation is thinking. And so if you have a tool that you can capture all these measures and you can plan out things, you're going to be more resilient. And for us, that $5 piece of paper is invaluable to making decisions. And then you have a database for years to come on what your decisions were. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy.
Okay, I wasn't ready for this. Collect on-farm data. Like, get that pasture stick out. Walk your, just hammer it like a post pounding, like into the pasture. And just when you graze, just write it down or take a picture in your cell phone, and it'll be time stamped and date stamped, and you can get to it in the winter when you have more time to think about it. Because, if someone like me comes out and you want help with the grazing plan or you want recommendations, the more information we have, the more useful we can be. Also, get to know your plants, right? Like you got to find harmony with your grass. You got to be kind to it. And so when you think about things, that's it. That's all I had to say. No, think about what your grass is doing, right? Like make it your partner. And be kind to it, because it's making a lot of food for your cows. You need it to like you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
I see one more thing popped up in the chat. So we're going to let Alicia get through her wrap up stuff. And then if anybody wants to stay on after that, feel free to stay on so we can answer that question. I just want to be cognizant of what time it is. So Alicia, go ahead and do our wrap up stuff.
Yeah, so thank you all for joining. As we mentioned, we will make this recording and the resources presented today available to you through Box, which you will get a link to that sent to your email that you registered with. So you should get that within the next couple of days. We do hope that you will join us next week at noon on March 9th. Betsy and I are going to be presenting some information on nutrition and grazing through the season. Any Q&A that we didn't get to, we will try to follow up as needed. And when you leave this meeting, there will be a survey that pops up. We would love your feedback on today's presentation so that we can use that to inform the rest of our series, as well as any future programming. And you may get the link also included in the follow-up email. It's the same one. You don't need to take it twice. So you can either take it now when it pops up or when it gets emailed to you later. And with that, thank you. And we will answer this last question.
Yeah, so if you have to leave, no worries, go ahead and take off. I just wanted to get this one specific to Troy because I forgot to bring it up. So Troy, this person says, I use your grazing chart template in Excel, but I wish there was an easy way to calculate and display recovery periods. Any suggestions?
So mine is just a bunch of lines. It doesn't do anything other than it's mostly pencil or record. But I just received a free grazing chart that has a lot more stuff that you can use like that. Yep. And so where I got it was Steve Kenyon at greenerpasturesranching.com. You can type in, can I get a free grazing chart? And what it has is his Excel spreadsheet with some of those notations that you want. It's also got a gross margin analysis. And I would be, remiss if I didn't say, there's a lot of grazing management tools like this chart, and they all have different capabilities. Some are free and some cost money. And so the ones that I'm aware of, like Maya Grazing, the Pasture map, they charge money, and it's, I don't know, it's upwards of $40 a month or whatever to get more data. It's certainly worth it to make a good decision. And so mine's fairly simple, but there's more tools in the toolbox actually now than there ever has been. So that's a great thing. So if you, again, go to Green Pastures Ranching, you can try that one, or you can try some other ones. You can type in grazing charts or grazing plan into Google, and they'll bring you to some of these other tools. And so again, you get in what you put in, you get out what you put in. I am thinking about signing up for Maya Grazing just because I can do the comparison. Here's what just the plain Jane looks like. And then here under Maya Grazing, here's what the other things I've learned or the calculations. Okay.
Great. Sam, you got anything you want to add? All right. Thank you both so much. You all did not disappoint. I'm just thrilled with both of you. So thank you so much.
I want to write about the, is it 10 o'clock grazing yet? Yeah.
We didn't talk about the bar brawl. That was the trampled grass. I just wanted to make sure that was brought up. So
it's a good analogy all the way around.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
All right, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, Trace. Thank you, Sam. All right.
Yeah.
We
Thanks,
will
Alicia.
see you. We will see most of you, if not all of you, next week. Sam and Troy, you guys are welcome to join us if you'd like. And let us know if you have any questions in the meanwhile, and see you next week.
Okay.
Thanks.
Have a good day.